Welcome to the Book Show, a celebration of reading and writers. I'm Joe Donahue. Pulitzer Prize winner Michael Cunningham's new novel, Day, is his first in a decade. It's a family saga set in New York City before and during the COVID-19 pandemic. The novel takes place on 3 separate days in April, one in each the years 2019, 2020, and 2021. The book is a story about people dealing with something terrible, and it's about survival. But more centrally, it's a story about love. In fact, Michael says love is most interesting when it has survived terrible tests. Michael Cunningham's previous novels include Specimen Days, By Nightfall, and The Hours, which won the Pulitzer Prize for fiction in 1999 and was adapted into an Oscar-winning movie of the same name. The new novel is Day, and it is a great pleasure to welcome to a packed house at the White Hart Inn in Salisbury, Connecticut, Michael Cunningham.
Thank you.
We've been talking, as people have been coming in tonight, about how excited we all were for this novel. And now, correct me if I'm wrong, but you were working on another novel. Mm-hmm. And then this one, then life happened.
Life has a way of happening, yeah.
Right. And then this one took over.
Yeah. I was about halfway through a very different book when the pandemic hit. And I thought, I don't see how you could write a contemporary novel as if the pandemic wasn't happening. I just couldn't find a way in the half-finished novel to include the pandemic without looking like I just suddenly brought the pandemic in. Like it was such a nice party till Godzilla came, who was expecting a 50-foot tall fire-breathing lizard. So I just put that one away and started this one. And then came the question, how do you write a book that does not ignore the pandemic, but is not about the pandemic specifically? Novels are about human beings. And, I have to say, in a certain way, we're already calling them pandemic novels.
Yes.
I didn't really want to write a pandemic novel. I don't especially want to read a pandemic novel. And yet, like I said, it would have felt like setting a novel in London during World War II without mentioning the Blitz. So how do you do this? And I sort of came up with the structure that you have already mentioned. It's one day in April, morning, afternoon, and evening, but morning takes place the year before the pandemic, afternoon takes place at the height of the pandemic, and then evening takes place in what I will call the post-pandemic, with the understanding that it's not exactly post for a lot of people.
We were slowly coming out.
But here we are,
right,
in a way we could not have been.
Correct.
Just recently.
So the fascinating part, of course, is the same day for the 3 years. One of the things that surprised me, I sort of knew that going in, one of the things that surprised me in reading it was the morning, afternoon, and evening. And how did you come upon that structure of saying that the time of day was also instrumental to putting this story together?
There are questions I can answer, and there are questions that I can't really answer because you just...
Oh, you're not going to play that game with me, are you?
Oh, you haven't seen the games I'm going to play. No, just what I mean is some choices are just sort of intuitive. And I just felt like 3 parts, let's just divide up a single day so it has that kind of coherence. I did a conversation with somebody who had, the day in question is April 5th. Right. And he had done all kinds of research on the history of April 5th. Charlemagne was elected emperor or became emperor and everything. And I said, well, actually, I just made it up. I just like the number 5. And I don't mean to be, what do I not mean to be, sort of whatever about it, but I feel like any good novel is composed of the conscious, that which you can say, well, I did this because of this. The sort of unconscious that you probably did for some reason, but you're not really aware of it, and the random.
Right.
And it's in sort of transposing those three different layers that a novel, one hopes, begins to resemble life.
The idea of when you come up with that structure, once you knew the 2019, 2020, 2021, I just have to quickly ask, did you care what happened on April 5th of those?
I thought conscious. I thought it should be April because I wanted the middle section during the pandemic to occur at the time, not that long ago, when we were hoping we weren't going to get it from opening the mail, when we wondered if we'd washed that banana enough. So April, but then 5th. But yes, April was that's from the intentional layer.
The intentional part. The idea of not, and much has been made about this in the reviews that I've read, which I don't really understand, but I'll ask you about it. You'll know. And that is is this conscious of not talking about COVID. COVID is never mentioned. Pandemic is never mentioned.
Yeah. That is conscious. I feel like anything terrible is somehow rendered a little less terrible when you call it by its name. In ancient Greece and Rome, you never said aloud the name of the god of the underworld, because what if you heard? Oh, God, I forgot about that guy. I've been meaning to bring him down. So really, I feel like people will know. Well, I don't imagine that it will be read when the pandemic is a memory, if it ever becomes or unremembered. But even so, it's a catastrophe. People will understand that.
Right. Michael Cunningham is our guest on this week's book show. We're talking about his new novel, Day, published by Random House. Tell us about the characters, because I've also heard the characters described as a dysfunctional family, which I don't like. I don't know how you feel about it, but they're odd, but they're quite. I know those people, right? I think most of us know those people.
Yeah. I was interested, for the purposes of this particular family, in a family, certainly a marriage, that isn't quite good enough to be good, but isn't quite bad enough to dissolve. It's that sort of undramatic middle in which I think a lot of us reside, which then left them ripe for, also intentional, the shakeup to come in the pandemic.
One of the things that I find fascinating is there are two children that feature prominently in the novel, a young girl, a slightly older boy.
Yeah.
And they are the children of the two parents you mentioned. And these kids, did you think that it was necessary to have children in the novel?
Yeah. For one thing, this couple would have children.
Yes.
And I feel like every single person on the planet was affected profoundly by the pandemic. It wasn't just there was no place to go where it wasn't. And I know that it was particularly hard on children.
Absolutely.
Go ahead. You're 5 and now you can't leave the house and you go to school on a computer.
But what is fascinating with what you do in the novel to me is that the first section, 2019 2019 is the longest of the three sections. And then we go to 2020, and then 2021 is the shortest section. What I find interesting is well before the pandemic, in 2019, you can still tell that these parents are going to screw these kids up.
Yeah.
Now, we can look now and say, oh man, it's the pandemic. These kids, they had a tough time. It's because of the pandemic.
Yeah.
Well,
yeah. No. The pandemic just makes it that much tougher. The parents, whose names are Isabel and Dan, worry that they're screwing the kids up, and are sort of helpless in the face of it. The marriage is sort of dissolving, and they're doing the best they can. But they are sort of implicit in the novel. I don't actually say this, but they're sort of watching in horror as their inability to continue to love each other is harming their children. And what do you do?
Right. And they're obviously concerned. They each have their concerns, and they're each dealing with it in their own way, but then they're also trying to figure out their own lives and paths.
Yeah. I'm sure I'm not the only one in this room who has a certain sense of what it's like to try to hold a marriage together and raise children simultaneously.
Right. Yeah.
Can we have a show of hands?
Suddenly it's a therapy group. I think also, well, I'd like to talk about you mentioned Dan and Isabel. I would like to talk about Robbie. Robbie is Isabel's brother, and the relationship between these three characters, which is quickly introduced to us, and I think that is a fascinating dynamic between three people.
Yeah. Yes, Robbie is Isabel's gay younger brother who is temporarily sort of living in the attic of their brownstone. And Dan and Isabel are each in their own way sort of in love with Robbie. For Isabel, he's her soulmate, except he's also her brother. So, and for Dan, it's a bromance. There's nothing actually erotic that happens, but there's always this kind of erotic undercurrent, a certain sense that these two men are becoming the sort of central couple raising the children together. So much of my adult life has been about the powers and the failures of queer or otherwise untraditional families. Starting with having survived the AIDS epidemic, when how many people who I knew got infected and called their parents and said, I have two things to tell you. And some of the parents were great, and some of the parents hung up the phone. And so a whole cohort of us sort of rallied around because somebody had to, and this is for now and until the end your new family. This is the disco bunny and a leather daddy and true lesbian organic farmers. And it wasn't perfect. There were fights and stuff that families go through, but I was aware pretty early on of the fact that I had been raised to think only your family will do. Well, guess what? Yeah.
There's a moment where Robbie and Dan are alone and they're working. I think they're in the kitchen and they're teasing each other in sort of an overtly sexual way,
Mm-hmm.
and you make it clear, the narrator makes it clear that this is something they would not say if anyone was in the room, that
Right.
this is the way they behave with each other,
Yeah.
which tells us a lot about that bond between the two.
Right.
which you can talk about first, because then I want to ask you about the second largest ball of twine.
Oh, sure. Happy to talk about that.
That's a teaser, folks.
Yeah. I mean, Dan sort of flirts with Robbie with the clear understanding that Robbie's not going to make a move or anything. So it's this kind of atmosphere in which Dan, for sort of complicated reasons, feels sort of free to be flirtatious with Robbie. One of my favorite quotes about sex was Oscar Wilde, who said, "Everything in the world is really about sex, except sex. Sex is really about power." So it's a power thing going on between them.
Right. And in your imagining, what does Robbie want from that relationship? Would he want more from that relationship?
Robbie, I think, is becoming aware of the fact that he feels like part of the family. He loves Isabel and Dan. He is almost raising the children very much the way the other two are, but it's not enough. I mean, finally, he really needs to have an actual romantic relationship. Not that he hasn't tried, but he is beginning to realize that this is a sanctuary, this is safe, and it's a little deadening, and maybe it's time to move on.
And back to my question about the children, I guess that's really instrumental in a lot of his decisions because he's so close with the children.
Yeah.
So we talk about April 5th, 2019, 2020, 2021, but there is another very pivotal day in this novel, and that is the day where Dan and Robbie take a road trip to see the, not first, but the second largest ball of twine in Kansas, which I hate to tell you, but I have seen.
No way.
Yeah.
Wow.
It was one of those things where my brother and I were driving down the road and we were like, oh, it's only 12 miles away. Like, all right, we got to go,
You are
right?
the first person I've met.
Really?
Yeah.
So your author research doesn't bring you to driving.
I didn't feel it was necessary to
Yeah, you sort of
go
get them. Well, this is, when we got there, the question that my brother and I immediately had was, I guess the first question was, why are we here? And then the second question was, okay, so we saw it, now can we leave?
Mm-hmm.
Like, we're done, right? This is it.
What's going to happen?
Right. But it's pivotal to these two. The car ride, anyway.
Yeah. What is happening is it's when Robbie is still in high school, as is Isabel is a senior, Robbie's a sophomore, and Dan, who at that point in his life is a sort of like young god with cascading golden hair and those upper arms and everything, and he is in love with Isabel, and she's not the queen of the prom. She's forceful, and she's beautiful in this sort of off-kilter way, and I think part of what drives Dan, this is all under the surface in the book, is he can't believe this girl isn't going for it. He's supposed to be, I've got good news for you. I, the god of our town, choose you. I says, I don't know. You don't seem that smart, really. And so he tries to, and sort of succeeds in bringing Isabel over by becoming best friends with her worshipful younger brother, who is all too glad to say, yeah, god of the town, come on. And so Dan sort of slightly calculatedly takes Robbie on this road trip so they will become best friends. And honestly, I just wanted a destination for them that would not, no disrespect to the Grand Canyon, but as some of us may know, this great land of ours is just full of really weird attractions. There's a hair museum, and in fact, there is the largest ball of twine, but there is, and you know better than anybody, the second largest ball of twine, and this is all true. I got it from the internet. I didn't go, but
Oh, it's true. It exists.
yeah. Oh no, I know it exists, but no. What I'm about to tell you is one of its sort of featured attraction, in order to differentiate it from the actual largest ball, is you can smell it.
Yeah. Yeah.
What?
Yeah. And it smells
smell it?
exactly what you would think it would smell like.
And I can tell you that in ball of twine world, there are constant arguments, like, is largest about weight, is largest about circumference, and
Yeah.
God bless every twine-obsessed person in the world.
I got a kick about over to the novel because it just seemed like the perfect place that a 16-year-old would want to go.
Yeah.
Like if you're going to go on a road trip, like you mentioned the Grand Canyon, like we can go to the Grand Canyon, or we can go see the second largest ball of twine. Well, let's go see the second ball.
Yeah. And it's also, I think unconsciously, Dan wants something that would be an ongoing joke between them. Like everybody's
Right.
been to the Grand Canyon, well, not everybody, but
Right.
They went to this really weird thing that no one, except you. I'm so happy to hear that. And you could smell it, right? No,
Hell yeah.
Okay,
yeah.
we're not going to do the entire evening about largest ball of twine, but I could actually.
So I'm going to make a comment, and then I'm going to ask you a question, which is, I read a lot for my job, and it is the thing that I find most difficult, and of course you teach writing as well. Man, endings are tough. It's tough to find what an audience will feel is a satisfying ending. Man, you nailed this. This is a beautiful, beautiful ending.
I'm very happy to hear.
I mean, it is perfect, and I'm curious as to how you got to the place where all those pieces came to that moment.
It's not accidental. That's not the right word, but I don't know in advance where a novel is headed. A lot of fantastic writers do. But I have found that if I know how it's going to end, the characters tend to become sort of employees whose job it is to take the novel to its conclusion. So I leave that sort of open. But someday I want to do a series of, I don't know, writing workshops or writing seminars called Hell If I Know. And our opening topic will be, how do you end a narrative?
Right.
Because, any story of any length takes place along a continuum, and at this end is those fish who grew feet and thought, well, this could work. And at the other end is, the sun implodes and absorbs the solar system. And every story is some little bit of that span of time. Every story is preceded by a huge past and shadowed by a sort of unknowable future. And for reasons I can't quite explain, it doesn't seem to be quite so difficult to figure out where to enter this continuum, but where to leave it. How to essentially say, we're done now. For now. The world will continue, these people will continue. You want to try to leave it to kind of, on one hand, solve the mystery, on the other hand, deepen the mystery. And, well, I maintain a mailing list, and I hope some of you will come to Hell If I Know, where we will discuss endings.
It seems, though, in reading your past work as well, that you have a confidence of how you're going to, that there is a skill, and then there is a confidence of where the story is, where the story is going, and how the story is going to conclude.
It looks a lot more confident when it's done than it does when it's starting out. And there's lots of messy stuff that no one will ever see. Just generally, I mean, writing fiction or writing anything is some really tricky balancing act between what I guess I'll say hubris and self-abnegation. You know, too much confidence and it doesn't come to life. Too little confidence and you can't do it at all. So you're always trying to find a balance between the two.
I heard, I was reading a couple of reviews after I finished the novel, and I came across the word elegant several times to describe your writing. Do you feel that fits? Because I'll be honest with you, I'm not sure I exactly know what it means.
I'm frankly not quite sure either. Elegant is not a word I would have thought of. I'm not quite sure. I don't really have other words to, ferocious, compelling, unput down, but no, I'm not quite sure what they mean, what those people meant by that.
Yeah. There is a comfort to the novel.
Good. Yeah.
I mean, even with what's happening, there is a comfort, and as I said about the characters, because you relate to these people, you know these people.
Well, I feel like one of the many purposes of fiction is for us to feel accompanied by it. It's not here to teach us a lesson. It's not here to improve us. We're already improved enough. It's a companionship, and I read and love novels that are much more bleak and brutal than what I do. I try to stay just this side of actual sentimentality. And my first reader is my husband, Kenny, who is the sentimentality police. He's really good.
Michael Cunningham's new novel is Day. It is published by Random House. Thanks to our producer, Sarah LeDuc. Write to us at book@wamc.org. The latest on National Productions programs is available via the Airwaves newsletter at wamc.org and on social media at WAMC Radio. Bookmark us from next week, and thanks for listening. From the White Hart Inn in Salisbury, Connecticut, I'm Joe Donahue.